So this whole last week during the Vacation Bible School, we've been hanging around in Athens with Paul. You know, Paul was on one of his missionary journeys, and he was in Thessalonica with Silas and Timothy, and got himself in a bit of a jam over there, which was not unusual for Paul at all. He was always getting in trouble, getting run out of town and things like that, and Thessalonica was no exception. He spoke to the council in Thessalonica and got chased out of town by this angry mob, and ends up over in Athens, where he's waiting for Silas and Timothy to show up. They never do, but he's waiting for him anyway. And, try to imagine what it was like in Athens at that time. Athens was like the center of culture for the world. I don't know, maybe it was like Paris in the 1920s. Or, I kind of think about, have you ever been to Washington, D.C.? To the mall there in Washington, D.C., where, you've got all the museums and all the government buildings and everything. And I always think maybe that's what it was like in Athens. But today we're gonna kind of journey back there to Athens, and we're gonna listen as Paul talks to the council in the Areopagus. When Paul went, he didn't just go to the synagogue. He spent time in the marketplace, and he got to know people, and he talked to people in the marketplace, and he talked to the Epicureans and to the Stoics, the philosophers that were hanging around town. And, some of them thought he was just a nutter. They said, who is this amateur? This, what I think he's trying to talk to us about some new god or something. I don't know what he's talking about. Other people say, well, this really sounds kind of interesting. And, the way Athens was at that time, it really was a lot like Paris in the 1920s. They would have in Paris, they would have these salons, and everybody would just get together to talk about new, fresh ideas. And that's exactly what they did in Athens. They would get together and talk about new ideas. Everybody loved new things. They loved new ideas. And anything that was unusual. And so after Paul had been doing that for a while, he was invited to come to the Areopagus. The Areopagus was like Mars Hill is the other name for it. And, that's the same place where 400 years earlier, Socrates was tried on that very spot. He was tried and condemned to death there in that very spot where Paul was invited to share his beliefs. It's where all the intellectuals and the elites and all the philosophers would gather there to hear new things. And they said to Paul, we'd like to understand these unusual ideas of yours. Would you explain them to us? And so Paul stood in the open space of the Areopagus, and he began to speak. And he began to speak. Where's Paul? Oh, there's Paul. Hi, Paul. Come on in.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome. Welcome to Athens.
Thank you. Athenians, I am a new visitor in your beautiful city. And as I've walked your streets, I have observed your strong religious ethos. You are truly religious people. I have stopped again and again to examine the religious statues and inscriptions that fill your city. And on one such altar, I read this inscription: to an unknown God. I'm not here to tell you about a strange foreign deity, but about this one whom you already worship, though not without full knowledge. This is the God who made the universe and all it contains. The God who is the Caesar, the Lord of heaven and earth. It would be illogical to assume that a God of this magnitude could possibly be contained in any man-made structure, no matter how majestic. Nor would it be logical to think that this God would need human beings to provide him with food and shelter. After all, he himself would have given to humans everything they need: life, breath, food, shelter, and so on. This is the only universal God, the one who made all of us, wherever we now live, whatever our nationality or culture or religion. This God made us in all our diversity from one original person, allowing each culture to have its own time to develop, giving each its own place to live and thrive in its distinct ways. His purpose in all of this was that people of every culture and religion would search for this ultimate God, would grope for him in the darkness, as if it were hoping to find him. Yet in truth, God is not far from any of us. For you know the saying, we live in God, we move in God, we exist in God. And still another said, we are indeed God's children. Since this is true, since we are indeed offspring of God's creative act, we shouldn't think of the deity as our own artifact, something made by our own hands, as if this great universal ultimate creator were simply a combination of elements like gold or silver or precious stone. No, God has patiently tolerated this kind of ignorance in the past. But now God says it's time to rethink our lives and reject these unenlightened assumptions. He has fixed a day of accountability when the whole world, including every culture and religion, will be justly evaluated by a new and higher standard, not by a statute, but by a living man. God selected this man and made him credible to all by raising him from the dead.
Well, thanks, Paul. So, when the people who were listening heard Paul talk about the resurrection, about raising people from the dead, most of them scoffed. Most of them thought, that is nuts. That's ridiculous. But others were really very, very curious by what Paul had said and about all the things that Paul talked about in that speech. And they asked Paul to come and speak to them another time, some other time, to come again and speak to them. But among them there was one man, Dionysius, and one woman, Damaris, who were convinced. They were convinced right there on the spot, and they came to faith that very day. That day, they believed. The question that I would like to address today, as we continue talking about and addressing our questions. One of the questions that I received, and one of the questions that I actually receive very frequently, is how can we share our faith with people of other beliefs? How can we share Jesus with people of other faiths and other traditions? How can we share Jesus with non-believers? And that's a great question. It really is. It's a good question. How do we talk to other people who have other beliefs in a way that doesn't offend them, in a way that is not off-putting, and in a way that allows them to hear us? And I guess my first response whenever I hear that question, it's like, really? Well, how would you share your favorite pop music song with somebody who only listens to country? How would you do that? Or how do you share your favorite flavor of Bluebell ice cream with someone who only has tasted vanilla? How would you do it? Or how would you share Van Gogh with somebody who had never seen Starry Night? Right? How would you do that? And really the answer to all three of those questions is very easy. It's like, come and see. I want to show you this Van Gogh. It's amazing. Come to Chicago with me and see it. It's in the art gallery there. Or come and see, or come and taste. Look, you got vanilla, and vanilla is cool. That's the most popular flavor of ice cream in the world, by the way. But have you had Poteet strawberry? Come and taste this. Or listen. Hey, I got this song I've been listening to. I love it. You want to hear it? Here, listen to take out your little earbud, stick it in their ear. That's how you share those things, right? Or am I off base? No, that's how you do it. You just share it. Come and see. Come and see for yourself. That's what Jesus said when he talked to people. He would say, you're going to see some amazing things. You're going to see angels ascending and descending on the Son of Man. You're going to see miracles. You're going to see all kinds of amazing things. Come and see. A very simple invitation. Come and see. And I'll tell you what, here's the way that you don't do it. The way you don't do it is you don't begin with, country music sucks. You don't start there. You don't start with, vanilla ice cream is gross. Because, you know what? When you put down something that someone else loves, the only thing you do is you make them defensive. The first thing they want to do is stand up and defend vanilla ice cream. Right? And they're not going to taste yours. And even if they do taste it, they're not going to like it. Right? And so all you do is you make them defensive, and you make yourself look like a pompous, well, we won't go there. But I think you get the idea, right? You get the idea that if you love Jesus and you want to share His grace with other people, you don't start by telling them how stupid the things they love are. All that's going to do, it's just going to be like this. Boom, boom, boom. No, if you want to share something, you don't share something with a closed fist ever. Right? I don't go, hey, I want to share this with you. No, I go, hey, I'd like to share this with you. You do it with open hands and open heart too. You don't start by telling them how messed up they are. Like, you don't go up to somebody, hey, you know what? I've noticed your life is a mess. And you need Jesus. Because, you know what? It ain't going to work. And even if it's true, right? Even if it's true, no matter how badly you think they need Jesus. I have never, ever made a new friend by telling somebody how ignorant they were. It's just, really. I think back over all the friends I've ever had in my life, and not one of them did my friendship result from an insult. Like, oh, you look weird. And no, it doesn't work that way. That's not how relationships work, is it? All that insults do is build up higher walls, create barriers. You insult somebody, and immediately their defenses go up, their barriers go up, and they are not going to hear you. A sincere compliment opens gates. A sincere compliment. Now I want you to, I notice I said sincere. I'm not talking about flattery. I'm not talking about, just, oh, your hair looks nice today, even though it doesn't. Or whatever. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about not superficial. Flattery's easy. It's easy to flatter people. Giving them a sincere compliment takes some thought. It takes noticing, paying attention, getting to know something about them, right? It means you have to know somebody well enough to know what is special about that person. And then you can give them a compliment. It's looking for value in the things that they care about. What do they care about? What's important to them? What are their values? What do they love? And that's what the Apostle Paul is a great example for us. A great example of just exactly what I'm trying to talk about here. So Paul goes to Athens. And he definitely wants to tell people about Jesus. That's Paul's life. It's his life mission. It's his work. It's what he does. He tells people about Jesus. And it's no exception. When he's in Athens, he wants to tell people about Jesus. Because you know what? Ever since Paul met Jesus on the road to Damascus, remember Paul's story? Paul started out as a Jesus hater. He was a persecutor of Christians. He hated Jesus. He would go around and round up Christians and throw them in jail. That was his mission. And one day he was on the road to Damascus on his way to go. He had papers in hand, ready to go arrest Christians in Damascus. He was feeling pretty good about himself. And all of a sudden there's this blinding flash of light. And it drops him to his knees. And a voice from heaven calls out and says, his name was Saul then. Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? And Saul is like, who are you? Who are you? And the voice said, I am Jesus, the one you've been persecuting. And when Jesus called Paul by name, it changed his whole life. And from that moment on, Jesus became the very center of his life. He loved Jesus so much that that's all he wanted to talk about. And he knew that Jesus was the way and the truth and the life, and that Jesus was the coolest cat that ever walked on the planet. He's the Son of God. He's the Messiah. He's the light that shines in the darkness, the author of life. He's the antidote to sin. And Paul knew all that. And he knew that Jesus is the Messiah, the one who will save all people. He believes in Jesus with his whole heart. He's like 100% in when it comes to Jesus. Paul loves Jesus, but he also loves people. He also loves people, because I think those two things go together. When you really love Jesus, you can't help it. You just start to love other people. Because that's the way Jesus teaches us. And that's the way Jesus works in us. Jesus opens up our hearts and opens up the love valve in there so that it just starts pouring out. And you just start loving people. And that's how Paul was. He loved all people. He especially loved strangers. He especially loved strangers. Because why else? Why else would Paul endure all that he endured? Why else would he even go on these missionary journeys and risk being arrested and flogged and beaten and attacked by wild animals and shipwrecked and all those things that happened to him? There's only one reason that he would do that. And that is because he loved people. He loved them. And he wants other people to experience the grace of Jesus Christ in the same way that he has experienced it. The love that he feels for Jesus and the love that he receives from Jesus, he wants other people to be able to experience that same kind of love, to have their lives transformed in the same way that his life was transformed. And he wants that for them because he loves them. And for no other reason. He wants them to know the love of Christ. He wants them to experience the grace of God. And he wants people to know the joy that comes from communion with the Holy Spirit. Joy from having the Spirit live within you. And he wants them to know, but he also, with the wisdom that comes from the Holy Spirit, he knows that before he can tell people about Jesus, before he can really share his faith with them, he has to first establish a relationship with them. He has to get to know them. So what does Paul do? Paul goes to Athens and he spends some time there. And he walks around the city. And he goes to the marketplace and he talks to people in the marketplace. And he goes to the synagogue and he talks to people in the synagogue. And he talks to the people in the streets. And he looks at all of the artwork and all of the statues and all of the monuments. And he just really gets to know, he immerses himself into that city. He talks to the philosophers. And he gets to know the people and the place where they live. He begins to understand their culture and what drives them and what's important to them. What are their values? He gets to know that whole city. He asks questions. He asks people questions. And he listens to their responses. He learns what's important to them. And then he begins to share what's important with him, what's important to him. Then he begins to share Jesus. And by now, since he has shown them the respect of listening to them, because he's shown an interest in them and in their values and their beliefs, now they're listening, they're willing to listen to what he has to say to them. And eventually, Paul gets the invitation to go to the Areopagus, to go to Mars Hill, and to speak to the council, to speak to the intellectuals and the elites of the city. And the point that I'm really trying to make, the point that I want to make, is that the way that Paul goes about sharing his faith with the council is, the first thing is he waits. He waits until he is invited to speak. You know, if you hang out with people long enough, they're going to invite you to share what you believe with them, because they're going to get interested in you. And especially if you show interest in them first. So that's the first thing Paul did. Paul didn't go to Athens and go straight to Mars Hill and say, hey, have I got something for you? You need this. He got to know the people first and waited until he was invited to speak. Until they decided that Paul had something interesting to share with them. And so Paul begins to speak, and notice where he begins. What's the first thing Paul says to them? Is the first thing he says to them, you know, you guys are worshiping these stupid stones, and I've got Jesus. It's not where he starts. You know what he starts out by saying? He starts out by saying, Athenians, I see how extremely religious you are in every way. And that's a sincere compliment. He's not being facetious. That's a sincere compliment. I see how religious you are in every way. Paul has spent enough time in that city, and he's gotten to know those people well enough that he knows that about them. Paul is like, he doesn't start from a place of power. He doesn't start from, I've got something you need. He starts from, wow, you guys are really religious. I like that about you. And then he uses something from their culture. Something that they believe in. Something from their culture as an entry point, as a starting point for his talking about God. He says, for as I walked around the city, I looked very carefully at all your monuments, at all your objects of worship, and I found among them an altar with the inscription, to an unknown God. To an unknown God. Which is amazing. Because what I came here to talk to you about is a God that you don't know. I came here to talk to you about an unknown God, and I found you already have a monument to this God. That's great. So let me tell you about Jesus. Let me tell you about Jesus. And boom, the gate's open. Now they can have a conversation. Now he can share with them. The council is now ready to hear what Paul has to say. He has complimented them. He has shown them that he understands their culture, that he values their culture, and he has found something in their culture, in their beliefs, that gives him the opportunity to speak, an opening to speak. So how do we do it? How do we share our faith with people of different traditions? We start by checking our motivation. Why? Why do we want to share Jesus with this person? Whoever that person is. Why do we want to do it? And if the answer to that question is anything less than love, if it is anything less than a desire to start or to build a sincere relationship, then maybe we're better off to just keep quiet. If you're not interested in that person, if all you're looking for is another star in your crown, another tick on your calendar, then just keep quiet. Don't bother. Because you're just going to end up offending that person and putting them off anyway. Our motivation is love. Jesus told us that we're supposed to love everybody, including our enemies. We love our friends, our strangers, everybody. That's our motivation. We have to care about that person if we're going to share Jesus with them. Why else would we share Jesus? It's like, I care about you and I want you to live forever. I want you to have that abundant life that Jesus offers. So, can I tell you this? The second step is before you start to tell people what you know, you need to show them that you care. And you do that by getting to know them, by asking them about their beliefs, about their values, what's important to them. And as you're doing that, you look for shared values and shared interests. This is all like stuff you learned in preschool, elementary school. You may not remember it, but you learned all this stuff back then. How to make a friend. Because sharing Jesus is all about how do you make a friend. And then we need to show that we are sincerely interested in what is important to the other person. Because if we show that we are sincerely interested in them, then they will become sincerely interested in what we have to say and what we have to share, what's important to us. Whatever you do, do not condemn or criticize. Affirm and then add to. Don't tell somebody, you know what, that's stupid. You really shouldn't believe that. Say, well, I hear what you're saying, and I understand what you believe, and Jesus. Not but Jesus, and Jesus. Add to. Affirm. I see how extremely religious you are in every way. May I tell you about the unknown God that you worship? That was Paul's approach. And from there it's just like ice cream. Oh, taste and see that the Lord is good. Oh, taste and see that the Lord is good to me. Amen.